Stranger Than Heaven is an upcoming brand new action game from RGG Studio that's been in the works for a while. When initially revealed a while back, it seemed like it was going to take place about 100 years ago from now and that it would have spanned across different specific years. We now know from the recent teaser that this game is going to have up to 5 eras and 5 cities for the players to explore. After a couple of titles that are very clearly not at the center of the studio's focus with some of their shortcomings, Stranger Than Heaven seems to be the opposite of that. It is a title that seems to be taking its time to cook, and the latest teaser looks somewhat promising, even though it's a teaser for a showcase that's coming in May. Having said that, there are concerns, predictions, and theories from the community regarding this game that will either enhance the experience or bring it down some. So, ladies and gents, welcome to the Stranger Than Heaven Copium tier list. I thought it would be a fun idea to just sit down and rate how likely some of these speculations will actually happen with this game, and we got several to go through. Sit down, relax, grab a drink, and let's dive right in. This is probably the first thing that anyone will wonder about, at least if you're familiar with RGG Studio. The studio is mostly known for making the Yakuza games and spin-offs that seem like they're doing their own thing but are actually part of the same universe, such as with the Judgment and Kurohyou games. They did make some actual unrelated games like all the different Super Monkey Ball games, Binary Domain, Fists of the North Star Lost Paradise, and so on. And even then, those games did have an appearance or more of Yakuza characters in them, or some form of reference. There was a period of time where RGG Studio wasn't officially known as that, but still were a team that developed games. In that time, they developed games like Spike Out, Daytona, Virtua Striker 3, and a bunch of others. But looking at recent history, both the Judgment and Kurohyou games ended up being tied to the Yakuza / Like a Dragon franchise. It's not too egregious to think that they would make a game that delves into the history of some of the organizations or characters in the franchise. One notable, maybe even decisive piece of information is the fact that when they show the 1965 shot, we see the Gate of Kamurocho, and an emphasis on how it says Kamurocho specifically, which is the fictional version of Kabukicho that's specifically in the Yakuza games. Kabukicho is the real-life city that it's based on. See, if the sign said Kabukicho or anything else, that could have been used in the argument that it's actually not Yakuza related. So, given all that and just a very strong gut feeling, I'm placing this into the S tier. You would have to be huffing some elite copium to believe that this game is gonna have nothing to do with Yakuza. Will this age poorly? Maybe, but we'll have to wait and see. That goes for the rest of the list, really. Listen, I know what you're thinking, and I'm sorry that we have to bring this one up this early, but it's been such a hot topic for some time now, and the idea that they might somehow shoehorn the Daidoji into this game is within the realm of possibility, I'd say. The Daidoji faction have been technically introduced starting Yakuza 6 in 2016, and that game does have a slight bit of lore on them, mostly towards the end. Then Yakuza 7 had very minimal mentions of them whenever Kiryu was involved. Then we have a game that's basically dedicated to the Daidoji faction, the Kiryu Gaiden. Infinite Wealth comes after that, with Kiryu being one of the protagonists, and they absolutely continue with the Daidoji story with him. Pirate Yakuza didn't do too much, if anything, with them. But then, as we all know, Kiwami 3 is a remake that literally retcons the death of the final boss and have him join this Daidoji faction. Now, we already established that Stranger Than Heaven will very likely be in the RGG universe. So a game that goes back to the past may very well take the chance to explore the history of some organizations. Given how strongly they've been pushing for the Daidoji to be involved in like every facet of the franchise, going as far as to not only revive a character in Kiwami 3, which believe it or not doesn't bother me too much, but also to recruit the same guy into this shadowy, know-it-all organization. This makes me wonder just how much more they're going to alter the already existing narratives that we have just to add to the Daidoji lore. Honestly, I have no problem with the idea of the Daidoji as a faction at all. It's just the execution and the direction of where they're going with it. Like, it's funny to just imagine that by, I don't know, 5 years' time, we're probably gonna have an army of past Yakuza villains that are all assembling under the Daidoji faction now. I'm telling you, just wait for Yakuza 9 or Yakuza 10 to have that all-star lineup that will make 0 sense, but you can bet they'll use it to farm aura and hype. Bearing in mind everything mentioned, I feel like you need to be on something if you believe with absolute certainty that the Daidoji won't somehow be roped into this game. See, I'm not gonna jump the gun and give it an S tier Copium, but the recent strong push makes me think an A tier Copium is adequate. The Tojo clan is probably the most important faction in the Yakuza games, which is funny to say because they're no more as of Yakuza 7, but their influence still carries on even in Infinite Wealth, where even though they're gone in name, the location is still there and was repurposed. Far too many characters in the RGG games have their history tied to this clan in some way or another, if not directly, then indirectly. Kiryu Kazuma is the easiest and most prominent example to speak of. We've seen this guy go in and out of the Tojo again and again, coming back to help them out of a pickle whenever they trip over the sidewalk. You have other legends like Majima, Saijima, Nishiki, Kazama, and the list goes on. Some characters weren't with the Tojo but directly clashed with them, like Ryuji or Watase. We know so much about the Tojo clan and yet so little. We know it was founded by a man named Makoto Tojo, who we never get to see. And to my knowledge, we barely even hear anything about him, if anything. Now, the protagonist in Stranger Than Heaven is suspiciously named Mako Daito. I'm not an expert in Japanese onomastics, and there's probably some things to be said there, but it's not hard to imagine that his name will at some point become Makoto Tojo, and he will turn out to be the founder of the Tojo clan. Everything we've seen about the game, and even the trailer itself, tells us that it's going to be a story about the Japanese underworld. I have a lot of confidence that this really will be the case with this game. Hence, I don't need much copium to believe this, and this will slot it into the D tier. The Omi Alliance, much like the Tojo clan, also has its importance in the Yakuza franchise, being the direct rival to it in most of the games that they both appear in. Here's an interesting tidbit. In Yakuza 7, when Watase gives the dissolution speech, he mentions in this letter that the Omi Alliance is 100 years old. Now, do the math. This speech happens in 2019 in-game. 100 years before that would be 1919. The earliest setting in Stranger Than Heaven takes place in 1915. And it's not crazy to imagine that even in this period, they might go into their inception and show us a little bit of their starting steps. All in all, the Omi Alliance may have a bigger presence than it initially seems, as they'll exist in, at the very least, 4 out of the 5 eras in the game. Meanwhile, with the Tojo clan, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe we still don't know any estimations as to when they were founded. So this game can basically decide that. This entry definitely goes hand in hand with the Tojo clan entry, so I think it'll be fair to put this in the D tier as well, as I think it would be just as likely for the Omi to show up in this game. The familial background of Kiryu is still very much shrouded in mystery. We know that Shintaro Kazuma killed his parents as part of a Tojo clan assassination job he carried out. Then, being all alone with no parents, Kazuma sent Kiryu to Sunflower Orphanage where he would meet Yumi and Nishiki. This orphanage was where Kazuma would send children that he himself orphaned. So Yumi and Nishiki were on the same boat as Kiryu. Beyond that, we don't really know anything about any of Kiryu's biological family. So naturally, given that this is a game that will go back in time and explore multiple years, there's talk about Kiryu's father potentially showing up and maybe even turning out to be the protagonist, Mako Daito himself. After all, thematically, it would only be fitting that the Yakuza so legendary would turn out to be the biological child of another hard-ass Yakuza, right? This is an idea that I wouldn't mind if it was explored, but I also would be fine if they were to leave it a mystery. As for how likely this is to come up, I feel like it can go either way. So, on the Copium spectrum, I'm gonna give it the middle ground of B tier. It may happen, it may not, we'll have to wait and see. If we were to assume that this game will be tied to the Yakuza games, it's only natural to think that they will probably have a familiar face or two show up somewhere. This game has a major advantage in that it will swap between 1915, 1929, 1943, 1951, and 1965. Granted, the list of characters born in all those years may be somewhat limited, but they can absolutely work with something. Some people were memeing that the Obitarian, being the immortal creature that she is, will probably worm her way in somehow.
Please fucking don't, I'm so sick.
It's also possible to see characters like a much younger Jin Goda, who is the leader of the Omi Alliance in Yakuza 2. Hell, given some of the DLC shenanigans that they do, I wouldn't be surprised if straight up Kiryu or Ichiban or anyone else would just show up as is as a helper in one of the side stories. This entry feels like a very safe C tier. There probably will be a few cameos or more than a few. It's kind of hard to imagine that there will be absolutely none of them. Another $1 million question. It's very safe to assume that Stranger Than Heaven has been in development for years at this point, like for longer than it seems on the surface. One might argue that they were so focused with this game that other games have had to suffer the consequences to some extent. After all, while this game was being made, we got a filler game that didn't do much to progress the overall story, coming from someone who found moderate enjoyment out of this game, by the way. An odd re-release, a remake that left many disappointed for more than just a few reasons. It's easy to see why the community's been in shambles this past year. And of course, there's some doubt as to whether Stranger Than Heaven will even be worth all this patience. Personally speaking, looking at the teaser, even though there's still much we don't know about the game for certain, I think the game does carry promise. It looks like it could be the refresher that many were looking for. RGG Studio has proved multiple times that at least when it comes to origin stories, like with Judgment, Kurohyou, Yakuza 1, Yakuza 7, that they're more likely than not to do an amazing job. The visuals of the game look nice, the music surrounding it is snazzy, the combat looks like it may pack a punch. There's ambition in the 5 cities and 5 eras idea, but even with all that, you don't truly know a game until you play it for yourself. I don't think it's unreasonable to say that I think this game will be great. I can see it being an 8 out of 10 at the bare minimum, and that deduction is mostly taken from the story, assuming it does some things that I'm not a fan of. Therefore, I think a C tier is good for this entry. Even with how promising it looks, there's always a chance that it doesn't stick the landing in multiple regards. RGG Studio has an interesting history with DLC. I have a whole video on it if you want to waste like 40 minutes of your life, but long story short, a lot of their DLCs are inconsequential. Stuff like item packs, gameplay-specific legendary characters that help you in whatever side story a game has. In some cases, pretty scummy consumable DLC, and in other cases, even more scummy DLC where they charge you for something as basic as difficulties. However, they did have a notable example of a great DLC that was enjoyed by many with Lost Judgment. The Kaito Files was a tad overpriced, story-focused expansion that had you play as the titular character. His story was around 10 hours, give or take, and really besides the price, the one fault that I found with it was that it was too story-focused, leaving not much on the gameplay side. Overall, it was a solid DLC. Unfortunately, that was like the one amazing DLC that RGG Studio had put out, at least relatively speaking, meaning that the odds of Stranger Than Heaven having something that will just make you ask, why, are unfortunately pretty high. Because of this entry will go into the big Copium A tier. I would love for them to surprise us with another great expansion though. And there you have it. Very modest tier list, but I thought this was a silly idea that would have been fun to just sit down, record, and share. I hope this was a nice little video to pass the time for you. I'll definitely be streaming the showcase in May when that happens, so feel free to join us. Thank you so much for watching and have an amazing day. Bye-bye now.